Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Tunnel Podcast, episode 62 of the greatest podcast in the world. Listen, final day drama has been complete. The playoffs are locked in. Relegation has been confirmed. And to go through it all, I'm joined as always by Tom Goff. Tom, how are we doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. Good bank holiday weekend. It's been top draw, and the footy sandwiched in between was it's what we were expecting on it. High levels of drama, plenty of entertainment, very exciting finish to the season. So good weekend all round, mate.
Yeah, listen, for anyone that didn't kind of join in on the watch along on Saturday, there was this kind of plenty of swings and sort of twists as it went along. None more so than probably down at the bottom. But yeah, we'll go through all that in due course. I do want to start by having a drink of this tea, so I'm just going to do that now before it goes cold. Just with the playoffs, really. We know obviously Leeds won the title, won it in the kind of last minute. And I think we spent a lot of time speaking about Leeds on the last pod, so we mentioned their kind of celebrations at the end, but I want to go straight into the playoffs. They have been confirmed. Sheffield United against Bristol City and Sunderland against Coventry. Just your initial take on those two semi-finals, if you can.
Look, I don't want to sound cliche, but I think there's some cracking matchups there, to be honest with you. I'm excited to see how they play out, and I tell you what, I do think it's really difficult to pick a favourite. I really do. I think there's been seasons in the past where there's definitely been one or even two, like last season, for example. Southampton and Leeds were the two standout teams in the playoff four. Both those teams obviously got to the final and played out a really tightly contested final match. But I just feel these four teams, might sound a little bit harsh to Sheffield United, considering how many points they amassed over the course of the season. They were well clear of the other three teams, but I don't know. I just think that it's anyone's. It's absolutely. And again, people say, obviously it's anyone's. But like I said, I think in the past there's been one or two teams that have been standout a lot stronger than the other couple of teams. This time round, I just feel all four teams are quite evenly matched, and they're all kind of in different places as well in terms of how they got into the playoffs, confidence going into the playoffs, etc. And I think those factors are balancing it out a bit as well. So it's going to be exciting, mate. Like I said, I think it's too close to call who I think is going to go and do it. I think they're going to be two really hotly contested semi-finals. I don't think there's going to be much in them, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be fireworks again.
Listen, I've done a bit of homework also before I came on for once in a couple of weeks. And can you read too much into these head-to-heads? If you look at, we had the 1-1 game with Bristol City and Sheffield United at Bramall Lane a couple of weeks ago, back in March. Bristol City got that late equaliser, if you remember rightly, and probably kind of ended, Sheffield United's kind of, title charge. But then you had the game early in the season at Ashton Gate, and Sheffield United get the late one on that day. Harrison Burrows scored in like the 98th minute. You look at Coventry and Sunderland. They played out a 2-2, and then there was the Haji Wright hat trick for 3-0 at Coventry's place. So how much can any side take from those games into the playoffs realistically?
You can take a bit. I definitely think you can take a bit from it. Like you said, the Bristol City Sheffield United games were obviously both games were close affairs, not much in it. Very even games. I think Coventry maybe can take something from it due to, like you touched on there, the last time they met one another was a comfortable 3-0 victory to Coventry City. Like you said, Haji Wright getting the win, but I don't know. take that with a little pinch of salt, because obviously I think that was when Coventry were on that crazy run. You know, they were riding the crest of that wave, and I think it was probably around the start of Sunderland's kind of dip in form. You know, they'd pretty much, you know, couldn't. Their automatic, challenge had kind of come to an end, but they were so clear of everyone else that they knew that they were going to get a playoff spot. And that was around the time when, you know, Sunderland kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit, kind of dropped down into third gear. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, you know, like you said, maybe Coventry can take a bit something going into it off the back of that comfortable victory last time round, but I don't know. I personally don't think.
What you've said, Dix, I want to pin you on that, because it's something that I've actually wrote down, and it's nice that you've brought it up. You mentioned that, you know, in the last game, Coventry were on the ascendancy and Sunderland maybe weren't, but you know, I look at the weekend, and Frank Lampard spoke and said, you know, I've tried to get the lads just to calm down, take a breath, and kind of do what they've been doing in recent weeks. You know, do what they're good at. You saw that. You watched the game live. You watched the 90 minutes. They look comfortable in places. Look like their old selves. 2-0. You then look at Sunderland. People saying, "Oh, they're making a lot of changes." You look at Sunderland lineup on Saturday. That arguably, bar the striker, is the starting 11. Whether it's Mayenda or Isidore, it was. I would say they were at full strength, and they still can't beat QPR. They still don't seem to have turned it round now. Regis Laprise kind of spoke after and said, "Look, that is the end of this chapter. We now must go and pen a new one." Ultimately, you speak about mentality, and you spoke about mentality in the last few weeks going into these games. Whether they're going to steal inches from the last meeting, but I just feel like there's something in it with these two teams, and I feel like Coventry may just feel like they've got the number. That the game up at the Stadium Light, they were 2-0 down. Remember, they come back and get the point 2-2, and they're comfortable in that last fixture that we speak about.
Yeah, mate, I think, I don't disagree with you whatsoever. I think Coventry City are in a much better place at this moment in time than Sunderland are. Yeah, like you said, I watched the game. I watched the Coventry Middlesbrough game the weekend. Look, Middlesbrough did have spells in the game where they were on top. Coventry keeper made some decent saves to keep the score at 1-0, but I did feel like Coventry were never really, seriously under threat. Like I said, there was a couple of decent chances, to be fair. I don't want to do Middlesbrough disservice, but yeah, I felt like Coventry, I just felt like they deserved the win. I thought they turned up. They obviously needed to turn up, get the 3 points, put in a performance, and they did exactly that. Understandably, there was a few nervy moments, and when Middlesbrough, towards the end of the game, when Middlesbrough were throwing everyone forward, they carved out a couple of opportunities, but I was impressed. I thought there was going to be more nerves there, and I didn't expect the level of performance that Coventry put in, to get the job done against Middlesbrough. So, yeah, they're going into the playoffs, off the back of a really good victory to kind of get the job done. I think you look at everyone's circumstances. I think you're talking about kind of mentally, what kind of the players and the teams, in terms of headspace, what are they thinking right now? I think Coventry's story of how they have got into the playoffs is, the best of the lot. And in terms of the players and what that will do for their confidence. Lampard taking over from Robbins, going on that crazy run to get them in the playoffs. It looked like maybe they were going to potentially stutter, right at the very end, but they didn't do that. They showed, strong, like you said, strong mentality, professionalism, get the job done. Whereas, like you said, the flip side of that is Sunderland. Ever since they were out of the automatic promotion race and pretty much guaranteed of a playoff spot, they've just took their foot off the gas. And like you said, there has been a bit of chopping and changing, and the briefs, resting a few key players, etc. But we're only talking kind of 2 or 3 changes here and there. We're not talking total starting 11 overhaul. It's kind of like for like changes, and decent swaps as well. By all means, we're not talking terrible replacements coming in off the bench, etc. And you look at, like you said, some of the teams that they've dropped points against of late, and at home as well, which is where it's been most surprising, is, it has been, quite shocking, to be honest, to see the fall off that, that's gone on there. So, yeah, I think out of the two semi-finals, I definitely think that's going to be the most intriguing, the most interesting one, because I think mostly due to this drop-off by Sunderland, because it's like you said, how it's going to be difficult, I feel, for Lebris to lift them, to lift them for this game. It's not going to take much, I don't feel, for Frank Lampard to lift the Coventry players. You know what I mean? They are absolutely buzzing because of what I said, how they've got into the playoffs, that win on the last day, good performance to beat Middlesbrough, obviously contesting with them to get one of those playoff spots. They're going to be full of confidence. He won't need to talk them up much. Where I just feel like Lebris has got one hell of a job to be able to G the Sunderland players up and get them, pumped up for this, these two playoff semi-final matches. So
just something else you've highlighted there in terms of home form. Coventry, again, another record attendance at the weekend. Seem to be really playing some of the better stuff at home. They play the first leg at home. Now, some managers would say you always want your second leg at home. But could Coventry be out of sight? And also, if the pressure is on Sunderland to get a result in that second leg at home, where you've just highlighted they've struggled of late, it's a difficult time for Regis Lebris to try and work out the chemistry here and get it back going again.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, I think Coventry. I saw the bookies odds, and look, the bookies always just go with position in the league, don't they? So Sheffield United favourites, Sunderland, Coventry, and Bristol. That's the running order. But I genuinely believe that Coventry are the favourites now in that leg. I genuinely believe that because of everything that we've just been speaking about. And like you said, I think the way the playoffs are set out is that the teams in third and fourth get that second leg at home because, like you said, it is seen as an advantage. But I think you're right. I think with Coventry playing that last game at home, getting the win, the crowd behind them, where their confidence is at this moment in time, where Sunderland's confidence is at this moment in time, I think it works quite well for Coventry to have this first game at home because, like you said, I genuinely feel there's a chance here that they could get, take a good win and a good buffer going into that second leg, at the Stadium of Light. So, yeah, it's like I said, I can't. It'll be interesting. Like, I haven't. I'm going to have a little look maybe next few days before the game on Friday night. See what the Sunderland fans, some of their podcasts, etc. See what they're saying, see what they're thinking. But I can only imagine that they are feeling quite nervous going into this game. And if they're saying otherwise, then I think they might be lying a little bit there because you've got to be concerned, don't you? You've got to be concerned with this drop off in form, who they've been losing games to. Like you said, yes, they have been making changes, but it hasn't been massive amounts of changes, and they've been bringing decent level standard of player off the bench into the team. So, yeah, at this moment in time, I would say Sunderland are the least favourite to go up. I would say I think Bristol City are in a better place than Sunderland at this moment in time. But and it's a big but. If Sunderland are able, if Lebris is able to kind of almost, hit them with the Men in Black pen and say, look, forget about, what's happened in the last couple of months, performances, results. We know how good we can be. We've just got to kind of put that behind us. If he's able to do that, then yeah, Sunderland have obviously got a fantastic chance because on their day, they are a great team. We've seen it. They're able to beat the very best in this division. For a good proportion of the season, they were obviously challenging the top three for those automatic positions. But again, I just think it's I know it's said so much, but confidence is so key and so vital. And I just feel like there's Coventry, who they're up against, are in much better place in terms of confidence and what that's going to do for them mentally than Sunderland are at the minute.
You mentioned there obviously the fans, and Sunderland fans saying that they may not be confident. I think maybe 6-7 weeks ago when Coventry run that run, Sunderland fans online were saying they don't want them in the playoffs. They don't want them in the playoffs. And here we are. So okay, let's shift to the other one. Sheffield United in Bristol City. Look, a massive achievement for Liam Manning and his side. I think that has to be kind of highlighted before we kind of dip into this. What I will say is, and this is just my personal opinion, I listened to his post-match today, and how can I put this? Almost felt like getting into the playoffs is the achievement itself. And I kind of felt like, no, you need to kind of park that and focus now. You've got a real chance here. And the moment after the game with the players and their families was fantastic. I thought, well, imagine that at Wembley, having gotten into the Premier League. I don't know. I just got a kind of, not a small team mentality, but it kind of felt like of a side that's not been there before, or a manager that's not been there before. Does that make sense? Whereas Chris Wilder's got a load of experience in his side, a load of experience in his backroom. They've been over the course and distance before in terms of promotion.
Yeah, I think so. Look, you're spot on with what you said there. In that, just Bristol getting into the playoffs is a fantastic achievement. It's been a successful season for them, no matter what. An incredibly successful season for them. However this playoff plays out, Liam Manning's done a fantastic job. For me, he was my manager of the season. But I think you're absolutely spot on. And what you're saying now, I think they can use that to their advantage, in that no one was really, I know obviously people have been talking them up, since they got into the playoffs, but I'm talking, for the first 3 quarters of the season, no one at the start was expecting Bristol to get into the playoffs. Throughout the vast majority of the season, even when they were kind of lingering up and down, going up and down a bit around mid-table, just outside the playoffs, etc., I still don't think anyone was taking them that seriously, to get a playoff spot. It's only right at the very end, once they got in, and they've been on this fantastic home run, that people started thinking, okay, Bristol City, they've got a chance here. So yeah, look, he's done an incredible job, and it's been a success. But what I'm saying is, I think they've got to use that to their advantage and try and get that across to the players. In like, well, look, you've done well. We've got here. You've done well. The season's a success, regardless of how these next couple of matches play out. But you've got nothing to lose here. You've got nothing to lose. No one expected us to be here. We've got here. Let's not, like you said, not have the kind of mindset, well, we've done well just to get here. What will be, what will be. We've got to now say to ourselves, let's use that to our advantage. The Sheffield United, the pressure's on Sheffield United, undoubtedly. The pressure is on them the most out of the 4 teams in the playoff, because of obviously the fact that they came down from the Premier League, the fact that they were in the automatic promotion mix for the vast majority of the season, for the fact that they finished on 90 points, 20 points, 21 points ahead of Bristol City. All the pressure's on Sheffield United. They're the favourites, bookies' favourites by some distance. So yeah, Manning's got and he will be trying to do that. I think he'll be trying to use that to his advantage. And you're right, it is a fantastic opportunity for them, because I feel like they've got I think Sheffield United are the best team in the last 4, but by no means are they unbeatable. Bristol City, like you just said, how they've got on against one another in the league, have got a great chance to get through this semi-final. And then what we've just discussed there, they may end up playing Coventry City in the final, and it's one game to then get to the Premier League. So yeah, I think I haven't seen the post-match stuff that you're talking about here, and yeah, I think probably there is a little bit there of maybe them not being a favourite to get in the playoffs, and like you said, they're probably the least favourite to now make it into the Premier League, and win the playoffs overall. But I don't, personally, I don't think the manning, the players, and the fans, should be thinking like that. And I don't think they will be. I think that they'll be thinking they've got a chance here. Like I said, I think Sheffield United, as good a season they've had, and then finish on 90 points. I do think you can get them. I do think you can beat them. If it was Leeds or Burnley to have, one of them to have not made automatics and one of them to have dropped back into the playoffs, and Sheffield United, say, made one of the automatic spots, I think it'd be a different story. I think they were that strong, those teams, that they would have been clear favourites, and it would have been incredibly difficult for someone to beat them. But I do think there's a chance against Sheffield United. So yeah, I think they'll be Bristol City. They'll be looking forward to. And like I said, there's no pressure on them. I think that's what they've got. Like I said, that's their asset in this. Is no one's expecting them now to go and win the playoffs. There's no pressure on them whatsoever. They're up against a team with the most pressure on them. Just go for it.
Just on Sheffield United and that pressure, Chris Wilder says he's been preparing for the playoffs for the last few games, trying to get kind of minutes into players' legs. He feels like most of the squad have got a full bill of health, which he said has been the first time this season. He's kind of, I think he's turned it down a notch, maybe to how he was, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago in terms of the title running. He knows they're under pressure, knows they can afford no slip-ups. I don't think, looking at Bristol City, as you say, he thinks he's got a gimme here because of the head-to-heads that they've had this season, and the style of play that Bristol City do have in times. We saw at the weekend that they're very slick when they get it going. They're decent in attack. They've got some good attacking players, as we mentioned at the weekend, in terms of Twine and Mehmeti and Hirakawa as well. But you just feel like, as you say, out of the four sides, squad-wise, they have got the biggest flex.
Yeah, they have. Look, they're the favourites, and rightly so. They've 90 points. I saw today that there's only 2 other seasons where 90 points wouldn't have taken you up automatically. So, he was always fond of obviously outlining that they were deducted 2 points as well. So, in theory, they've finished on 92 points, which in, the vast majority of seasons is an automatic, promotion winning season. You're going back into the Prem. So, they have been incredibly unlucky, really, that they've had those 2 teams sat above them. But on the flip side, it has been a really fantastic season for them. They've given it a real good go. And, Wilder, I saw him come out and he's talking, brilliant achievement, and he's proud of the team, etc. And, rightly so, they have had, a cracking season. It's a strange one, because I think it's done them a bit of a favour that they dropped out that they've had a couple of games now since when it was confirmed that they couldn't go up automatically, and obviously till the end of the season. I think that has helped them in that. I think if they'd gone right to the very end with Leeds and Burnley and then not made it right at the very end of the season, last day, say, I think that would have just stung them so badly mentally, going into those playoffs. I honestly feel that, it would have just been too big a factor for them to get their head around that and to, get themselves prepared and ready for those 2 matches. But I feel like those couple of games that they've now had, they've got a couple of decent wins. Like you said, I think Wilder's probably, been trying to get them over the disappointment of missing out on the automatics and trying to obviously get them into the right frame of mind going into these playoff games. And they made a few changes in the last game against Blackburn Rovers, and I honestly fancied Blackburn to maybe get the 3 points there, but they held them off, and they did they did a favour ultimately to Bristol, didn't they? The team that they're now going to be playing against. But I don't know. I think what I'm trying to say is I think they're in a good place. I think they're in a good place. I think they've had a couple of games now to kind of get back at it, settle down a little bit after the disappointment of missing out on the automatics. Like you said, they've got a few key players back in the team now. He's got a pretty fully fit squad available to him. So I think Wilder will be confident going into this game. I think the Sheffield United fans will be feeling confident going into this game, and I understand why, and I think they are. I think they are the favourites, just given the players that they've got available to them. I think the biggest thing with Sheffield United is the options that they've got off the bench as well. If things aren't working out, they've got such a great bench available to him as well. So if he needs to change things in game or there's an injury, etc. So look, that again, that's going to be a cracking game. Different reasons, I feel, to the other one we've discussed, but again, I just feel like it's incredible, despite that difference in points, where both were sat in the table come the end. I still think it's going to be incredibly close. I don't think there's going to be much in it. I really don't.
I think what you say about Chris Wilder, and I've listened to him over the last couple of weeks, he seems to be kind of pumping the narrative that it has been a good season already. It's been a successful season. They've amassed almost 2 points per game. He sees that the players have done really well. They should be proud of themselves. So it's almost like he is trying to create that positive mindset going into these 3 games, because on the flip side, as we spoke about earlier on, Sunderland look like going into it on a bit of a downer, which could obviously hamper their chances. Okay, we'll draw a line under that. We'll move on to the bottom, because it was a tasty day at the bottom. Now, we kind of spoke on last Thursday, and I think out of all of it, we were kind of saying, Luton will be fine. They'll go to the Hawthorns. They'll get what they need. West Brom are kind of on the beach. They want to go and, call the season now. But how far wrong were we? And right from the off, West Brom seemed to, get a few goals. It seemed to create a bit of noise down at Fratton Park, and Hull knew what they had to do then.
Yeah, like you said, obviously we quite fancied Luton to at least get a point against the Baggies. If not, get the 3 points based on the form of both teams going into the game. They were ultimately going to kind of steer themselves clear, because we felt that results would go their way elsewhere. But first and foremost, Baggies obviously on their day. We're a good team. We can give the very best a good game. But I just feel it's a massive missed opportunity for Luton. I honestly do, because I just feel like if they had, again, we're talking about how pressure, what it can do to players, what it can do to teams. I just feel that it must have been a case of the pressure getting to Luton. I honestly do, because if they came to the Hawthorns and put in a performance like they had, against, say, Coventry in one of the previous matches where they got that 1-0 win, or the draw against Leeds, I'd watched them a few times, and they'd been really well organised defensively, disciplined, a threat going forward as well. A couple of their attacking players were starting to really pick up and pose a threat in the final third. But I just feel like they just bottled it mentally, I feel. And like you said, we obviously got an early goal, and they almost just seemed to, after that second went in, it was almost just like, everything just zapped out of them. Do you know what I mean? They were just dreading the worst, and the cards just folded, and they're just hoping then that results go their way elsewhere.
It always seemed to, it kind of transcended into the Smethwick as well. The away fans were kind of zapped. You saw clips from them. There's an infamous one doing the rounds at the minute with a guy with glasses on that says, "Can anyone lip read what this guy's saying?" And it's quite easy to lip read what this guy is saying. So, do you think it was kind of too little, too late in terms of Matt Bloomfield, because he took maybe 10, 11 games, was it, to get something on the board? They did back him in January. You've got to say they did spend a little bit of money. And it's all kind of come together probably just that little bit too late in terms of putting some form together, putting a run of results together.
Yeah, that's obviously the case. I do feel he had a tough task, because I just feel, we said it, I remember when he was appointed, and we were discussing the risk of appointing him from from Wickham and not having any championship experience. And, you know, it was always going to be incredibly difficult for him to lift the team. It was always going to take a bit of time for him to lift them a bit, for him to, gather a bit of confidence and that for them to start transcending onto the pitch and then putting in some better performances, due to the relegation from the Premier League and then the horrific first half of the season that they had. But, it looked like, he was starting to build something. And, those guys that he bought in January were starting to have a say. They were starting to become important players for him on the pitch. He was starting to implement his ideas and they were starting to get a bit of an identity under him. But like you said, it was just too little too late. I think it would be very harsh to point the finger and criticise him too much. I honestly do. I think, it was going to be incredibly difficult for anyone that came in to try and turn things around, try and lift them. And I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised that they were still in with a shout of staying up on the final day of the season. There was a few times where, I looked at the table and thought, oh, well, count Luton out, they're done. But, he managed to, like you said, put a bit of a run together. I think, I saw a bit of a stat before the Albion game in terms of, last 4 or 5 matches and, points won. I think there was only like the top 2 that were ahead of him, so that showed you how good the run he was on at the end of the season. But yeah, that's why it was so odd for me that they just kind of folded like they did on the last game of the season. I genuinely believed that they were going to give us, a real good game, and they were going to make, be really well organised at the back and make it difficult for us to score. So for us to score 5 goals, which we haven't done for a hell of a long time. Let's put it that way. I think I was just surprised at how they capitulated, really. I think over the course of the season, I think it's very difficult for you to say that they didn't deserve to go down, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, the league table never lies, is what they say. Just on the flip side, that then Hull, you obviously celebrate with the away fans. They get the draw that they need to kind of stay in the division. I do think there's still question marks over Hull in terms of next season. We've mentioned this before. Birmingham and Wrexham coming up. They're not coming up to fight in the bottom 3. Let's be honest. They'll go out and they'll spudge. In terms of recruitment at Hull, though, that's where you feel there's a genuine concern. You don't like the recruitment style. You think that needs shaking up completely. We spoke on Thursday night. There's already financial troubles, players not being paid, and that there was an issue there. So if that carries on, that could cause them problems next season. Hull, Preston, Stoke. I think Derby will probably push on under John Eustace. I'll give him that. But the 3 clubs there, Preston in particular and Hull, they could be in real bother again next season, couldn't they?
I think Preston Hull will be. Look, I'm still confident that Mark Robins is a decent manager. I know he didn't pull Stoke away as well as we expected. When he was brought in, and hasn't done as good a job as most people thought he was going to. But I do think now with a pre-season, for him to kind of get rid of a few players, shape the squad to his liking. I do think Stoke will be better next season. I'd be incredibly surprised if they were kind of down there right from the off. But I think you're absolutely spot on. I think Preston and Hull have got problems next season unless something drastic happens in the summer. Because like you said, we'll start with Hull. I just think like you said, their owner. I just think he's just an absolute head case, and I think that's evidenced in this just mad approach they have when it comes to recruitment. In that, they've I don't know how many players they've got in the squad at this moment in time, but it's absolutely insane. And it's like, it's full of kind of like loan signings, and there's these guys who are right at the very end of their career and on short-term contracts, and loan signs of some promising youngsters and guys. It's just, I think that's arguably the biggest job this summer is Sellers, trimming down that squad and taking, a a competitive, healthy squad into the start of next season, because it's just a mess. And like you've just touched on there, this crazy scattergun approach that they have to transfers and just bringing in as many players as they possibly can has obviously had a negative financial effect as well, because like you said, they're struggling to pay wages and stuff at the minute. So massive purge is needed at that club over the summer. Big clear out. And Sellers needs a lot of help in terms of, like I said, just kind of moulding a much smaller competitive squad to his liking. But I just, with that guy in charge calling the shots, I just don't think it's ever going to happen. I just think he's completely bonkers, and he probably, doesn't think, he's made any wrong decisions over the course of the last season. It all started with him sacking Rossini. Look at that decision right from the very off, getting rid of Rossini. Look what he's doing now in League One. And Hull staying up by the skin of their teeth, on goal difference. So
I think the owner will have. I think he has some say on maybe more of these, journeymen that you spoke about coming from the Turkish league. Amrabat's brother, João Pedro, who's not been too bad, from reports. But I don't think their players like maybe Ruben Sellers has said, "I'll have those." I think the manager said, "There you go." Whereas 100%. The guys like maybe Joe Gelhardt, they might be signings that the manager's kind of been more involved in, and I think they're the signings that the fans maybe want to see more of, young kind of promising players.
Oh yeah, definitely. Look, they made a couple of. Within all the madness, they made a couple of good additions in January, and I think those guys are the ones that have ultimately kept them up. The likes of Crooks, the likes of Gelhardt, they've turned out to be good additions and have played a role in keeping them in the division. But then, like you said, there's so many signings that were made in the summer and in January as well that have just done absolutely nothing. That are sat there, soaking up the wages, and it's obviously having a detrimental effect to the club financially. But like I said to you, I said to you, didn't I? I felt like it was going to have a detrimental effect on the pitch as well, because I just feel it's difficult for any manager when you've got this massive squad, trying to keep them all happy and keep them all sweet. I think there was half a dozen players that weren't able to be registered, alone, after the January transfer window shut, because they had that many players. So, it just needs a big tidy up. I just feel in the summer, Hull. It just, it's almost like he just needs to calm down a little bit, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Just calm down a little bit. Just have a big clear out. Because I bet you, if he was to have a big clear out, there's probably some guys there on decent wages. That'd take a big hit of difficulties that they're experiencing financially. But yeah, I know a lot of Hull fans don't trust him, and as a neutral looking in, I can understand why. I wouldn't be, if I was a Hull fan, I wouldn't be confident that yes, our owner is going to sort this out over the summer, is going to back Sellers, and we're going to have, like I said, a much more harmonious group of players going into the start of next season. I wouldn't be confident at all that he was going to be able to do that.
Well, we just have to look at the news that's broke today. I think, Captain Louis Coyle's been involved in some sort of nightclub fracas with him and his brother. And there's been all sorts of, kind of images, CCTV footage doing this. So, as you say there, the circus is continuing. It's not stopping anytime soon. Just on Preston then, because you made a point the other night and you were kind of saying, look, they were on the crest of a wave at one point. They were in the FA Cup. It was the first they ever got. And yada, yada, yada. And people were really kind of rejoicing in that famous old club. But the wheels fell off quite quickly. There's been a lot of finger pointing in recruitment at the football club. I listened to Paul Heckingbottom after the game at the weekend, and he kind of showed stark contrast in terms of Bristol City and how they're building the club and what they're doing in terms of academies and training grounds, etc. And you look at, let's pick some of the signings they brought in. Is it Thornison, the biggest Islamic chap? He came in. He's not done a great deal. I think their record signing was Oakles. He ended up at Aberdeen in January on loan. Didn't do anything of any real note in the first half of the season. So they've just kind of squandered millions of pounds in the transfer market. The recruitment's been so far off.
Well, I think the problem with Preston is that for a long time now they haven't had much money. But up until recently, they've always been quite shrewd with their signings, and they've always, the small amount of money that they have had available to them, they've always spent well. They've always been one of these clubs that's kind of, especially players from like League One and League Two. They've found some real gems who have been able to make the step up. They haven't spent much money on them. Good age, and for a long time now, Preston have just flirted around mid-table. Flirted around the playoffs or flirted around relegation, but have never really kind of got pulled into either, and always finished around mid-table. And as much as people will go, "Oh, that's boring," how boring it must be for a Preston fan, etc. If you look, in terms of, like you said, the size of the club, I know they've got a lot of history associated to them, but in terms of the size of the club now, how much money they spend each season, just the depth and quality of player available in the squad, finishing mid-table all those seasons has probably been a bit of an overachievement for them. But you're right. I think this season, they obviously did. The money that they did have, they didn't spend it well. Like you said, if anything, in terms of Preston and what they've done in the past, they probably did splash the cash a little bit more than usual. But unfortunately, those signings just didn't come off for them. And I think the problem they've then had is that because they've got such a small squad, that they've had that run in the FA Cup, I think that's probably taken quite a lot out of them, and understandably. And then what's happened is it's just had a real negative effect on them once they got kicked out by Aston Villa. Business end of the season. They've just looked spent, haven't they? And obviously they've gone on that terrible run, and she's dragged them into the mix, and they're fighting for their lives on the last day of the season. So I can kind of understand, why it played out like it did. But yeah, this is the thing. It's fine Heckingbottom coming out and saying, I think maybe why he's kind of making comparisons to Bristol is, to be fair to Bristol, I don't think they spent a lot of money, to be fair to them. And like you said, I think maybe, they've been making more of an effort and more of a push to, like you said, improve their academy, the younger players coming up through the squad, and, improve their scouting network, etc. So when they do spend money, there's a very good chance that it's going to come to fruition. So maybe that's why he's kind of making the comparisons to Bristol, is that, they've done it right and they maybe haven't. But, I don't think that Preston are ever going to be a team that spends shed loads of money unless they got a new owner come through the door. So, I think it's going to be very much of the same for Heckingbottom next season. And I think the most concerning thing for Preston is basically what we were talking about earlier, is that they've got some of their key players who are out of contract, who look like they're going to be leaving on the free. So, not only have they had a really tough season and just about stayed up, come the end, is it looks like they're going to lose some key players for nothing, and then, Reece and Ledson are ones that stand out, guys that are 26, 27.
On loan, he goes back, doesn't he, as well?
Yeah. So, and this is the thing, is that, they're losing good standard championship players, good age, for absolutely nothing. Now, I don't care what anyone says, that's poor management, behind the scenes, maybe if these guys were kind of in their early 30s, maybe you can kind of see some sense to it. But, for these guys to be leaving on a free, some of their better players, that's a massive concern, because not only should they looking to improve and better the squad as it stands now, well, they're losing some of the better players from this squad as it stands now. So they've got to replace them, and then they've got to add on top of them, if you know what I mean. So I think you're absolutely spot on. I think massive, it's going to be a huge summer for both Hull and Preston, but for different reasons. But it almost feels like both managers have got that, one hand tied behind their back, right from the off. It's going to be incredibly tough for them to, feels like it at the very least for them to have a competitive team, ready to go on come the first day of the season.
Do you think any of the sides kind of down there, like Derby, Stoke, Oxford, Hull even, or Preston, will be maybe trying to cherry pick a couple of the star players from the three that have went down? You think that's a tactic that they may look at?
I think you got to. I think all the teams in the Championship will be looking to do that, to be honest with you, mate, because I think there's probably players from all three teams that, well, there most definitely is players from all three teams that can, do a job at Championship level. I think, they've proven it. And undoubtedly all the rest of the teams in the Championship will be thinking exactly that. Is there a few bargains to be had here? Is there a few players that we can pick up for, decent fee that we know full well can do a job for us in the Championship? I think you're right. I think, the teams, most definitely the teams in the bottom half of the table, they should be doing that, in my opinion, because maybe the teams higher up, maybe kind of looking to the Premier League maybe for signings, or maybe got better scouting networks set up ready to look abroad. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, mate, for like Portsmouth, Oxford, Derby thinking, let's have a go for some of Plymouth's top players or Cardiff's players, because those guys are undoubtedly going to want to make the move, and remain playing in the second tier of English football instead of the third. So this is why it's tough, mate. This is why it's ruthless, isn't it? Because dog eat dog. Those three teams. That's the concern now. Is not only are you getting relegated, it's are our best players going to get plucked away in the summer as well? I think.
Is there a case when you look at the bottom sides? Argyle scored the most goals, 51 for. The rest of them kind of 44, 45. I know Derby and Preston got 48, but you mentioned a couple of weeks ago Ryan Hardy. He's got to be maybe the gem of the three clubs that's going down.
I think so. Just he's finished. How impressive his finish to the season was.
He got Plymouth's Player of the Season, and he was obviously injured for a short spell as well.
Yeah, I'd be astonished if Hardy wasn't playing for a Championship team. Come next season, unless the guy shows some loyalty and says, I want to try and spearhead a promotion charge and get us back in the Championship. But it's like you said, I think he probably deserves to stay in the Championship first and foremost, and probably play for a team that's sat a lot higher up the table, instead of scrapping down at the bottom. So look, mate, there's I think a couple of those guys that Plymouth brought in, a couple of those defenders, could most definitely do a job in the Championship. There'll be teams looking at them. As poor a season as Cardiff have, I do think they've got some players. Cole, like you said, I'm a big fan of Cole in midfield. Really good young attacking midfielder. I think he'll have suitors for sure. Luton, as badly as Adebayo and Morris have done up front, I definitely think there'll be Championship teams thinking, well, I know they did crap last season, but I think they're probably worth taking a risk. They've shown that they can score goals for fun.
Well, Borough have been linked with Adebayo today. They've also been linked with Tyrese Doolan at Blackburn as well. I think we're going to get linked to a lot of players because they seem to do a hell of a lot of recruitment. But as you say, there is gems to be had. I just want to kind of. I know we've got kind of 10 minutes left, and I want to go through your out of contract 11 to end with if we can for 5 minutes. We've just quickly on Leeds saw the celebrations today. Fantastic scenes up in West Yorkshire. 100,000 people plus today, in the city centre. One story that's come out of it, and one story that you kind of jumped on me up before we came on air was, the owner or the club representative, the chief executive, we can call him, has come out and kind of said, Daniel Farke is going to be the Leeds manager for the start of the Premier League campaign. And we spent maybe 20 minutes discussing this the other night. What do you make of that U-turn? Does that tell you there's been maybe successful talks between the manager and the owners, or how do you see how that's panned out?
First and foremost, mate, I like it. I've got a lot of time for it. Because I genuinely didn't think that was going to be the case. And like you said, we spoke about it in the last pod, and I said, I could understand if they were, if the decision was made to get rid of him and get someone more high profile in. But I just feel like anyone that gets a team promoted deserves to at least start the season, at least have a crack at the start of the season. I think that's at the very least what you deserve. So I'm really pleased to see that, and he's come out. And I think the thing that's good is that it's not just kind of whispers and rumours through the press. He's come out, he's been interviewed, he's said this. So, if he's to go back on his word now, he's not going to look good, is he? He's really come out and said, Farke's my guy, hasn't he? Basically, we've had chats. I'm going to back him 100% in the summer, build him a squad. And like I said, mate, I'm pleased to see it. I'm glad for Farke, because again, I don't know if you saw Farke at the end of the Plymouth game where all the players were celebrating with the fans, and he was kind of tucked away in the dugout on his own. I don't know if you saw that.
No,
and that got a lot of people speculating, thinking, well, does he potentially know that this is it? He's got him up, but he's most likely not going to have a crack, at the Premier League with them. So I'm pleased for Farke, and like I said last time out, I'm hoping that he can do a good job with Leeds in the Premier League, because he has been labelled with this brush that he's just a good manager, Championship level. Yes, he'll get you out of the Championship, but he ain't going to keep you in the Premier League. So I'm really hoping that he's able to do that with Leeds, because I think there's a lot to like about him. The way he plays football, I always think his team's an enjoyable team to watch. He looks to score goals and play exciting football and attack. But he doesn't. He hasn't got an ego. He's always quite calm and collected when he's interviewed. Always comes across well. Seems a really top bloke. So I'm chuffed for him.
You mentioned there about they're going to back him and replenish his squad. Kind of news coming out today that Junior Firpo's obviously out of contract. Looks like he's off to Real Betis. That's a huge loss, isn't it? How great the fullbacks have been this season. He's scored a lot of goals this season as well. Yeah,
that's a surprise. That so it was like when we were, obviously we weren't touching it when I was looking at the out of contract Championship players, and I was surprised to see he was one of them. And then, like you said, I saw that it already looks like he's got a move lined up. I think that'll be a big loss for him, because I think he's probably one who, at the very least, could be a good squad player at Premier League level, in my opinion. But I think with these owners, I do expect them to make some high-profile signings. Let's put it that way. I think they're going to, whereas maybe Ipswich and Southampton and even Leicester, for example, they kind of focused on maybe the best that the Championship has to offer, bring those guys in the hope that they can make the step up. But then if they don't and we go back down, we know that they're going to be good players at Championship level. I don't think Leeds will do that. I think they're going to make some kind of, some big signings that are going to shock people, But I'm just like I said, I'm just glad that they've kind of stuck with Farke. They're going to give him a shot. They're going to back him, and they're going to let him try and keep Leeds in the Premier League.
Okay, let's move on to this contract 11 that you've done, because obviously I've seen loads of stuff from clubs saying this player's staying, this player's going, and we've had a bit of fun. Well, you've had a bit of fun with it, I should say. For anyone that hasn't seen it, we'll go through it. Kind of, you've got Angus Gunn in goal now. Angus Gunn's been linked to Leeds United. He's been linked to turn up at Leeds. Is that a move you can see happening? Is that a good move?
Nah, that ain't going to happen, mate. I tell you now, I think, Leeds are going to look to, most definitely going to look to make a goalkeeper signing. But like I said, I just feel like they're going to be going for much more high profile targets than Gunn. Like, look, no offense to Gunn, I do think he's a good goalkeeper at Championship level, and like I said, I think he'll be snapped up by another Championship club for sure, and one that's probably in the top half of the division. But yeah, I can't see that move happening. But it was a toss up between Gunn and Woodman at Preston, who again he can be a bit hit and miss. Freddie Woodman at Preston, but
he's been linked to Manchester United.
Has he really?
Yeah, I don't know if that's just for like a third choice or so they've got some sort of English quota, but he's been linked to Manchester United. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like you said, it can't be for first choice. I'll tell you that. But again, him and Gunn are two decent Championship level goalkeepers that are up for grabs there. So I think both players. I know Gunn. It's confirmed that Gunn's leaving. I'm not sure whether Preston are trying to offer Woodman a new contract. I don't think they are actually, because I saw that today that Preston had agreed a deal with Iverson, who's one of the Leicester goalkeepers, a Danish lad, and who was at loan at Preston a couple of seasons ago. Yeah, that's it. So it looks like Woodman's off as well. So yeah, a couple of decent keepers there up for grabs in the summer.
You've got a back four of Jimmy Dunn, Ajayi, Darling, and Gooch. Talk us through those picks.
I think, look, two out of those three, I think they'll be suitors for. I think Dunn and Darling. I think there'll be a lot of people after Darling at Swansea. If Swansea aren't able to tie him down to a new contract, which I believe is the hope, with how good Sheenan's done. I know that they're trying to convince Darling to stay, but yeah, if he decides that his future isn't at Swansea and it's elsewhere, he won't be short on suitors because of his age as well. I think his age is a massive factor there. How much football he's still got ahead of him. Dunn as well. Dunn. I think he's about 27 now. Dunn, but he was one of the highest rated defenders in the division last season, which is quite surprising considering the kind of indifferent season that QPR had. But yeah, he was one of the highest rated defenders, if not the highest rated right back, I believe. So he'll definitely have a few people out there, looking at him thinking, well, we can snap this guy up for free. We just got to offer him a decent contract. So yeah, I think there'll be plenty of suitors after those two. Look, Ajayi, again, on his day he can be a good player at Championship level, but he's been very inconsistent for us for a long time now, and he's also, the longer his career's gone on, the more injury problems he's had. So yeah, I'm personally, as a West Brom fan, I'm pleased that we're releasing him. We're not extending his contract, but I don't know. I think he could be a good signing for maybe a team that was to come up from League One, or an Oxford, say, or a Portsmouth. Someone like that. I think he could potentially do a job. And Gooch, man, I just went for Gooch because of the name. It had to be done, didn't
it? I'm glad you said it, not me. In midfield, you've got
best name in football, mate. No, look, all jokes aside, again, he's not a bad player at this level. Again, I don't know if Stoke are looking to offer him a new deal or not. I was trying to find out, but struggling to see any kind of news. But he a bit of a utility man. He can play kind of right back, left back, right mid, left mid. A lot of experience at this level. Again, I believe he's 28, 29. So he's still at a good age. So I went for him at left back. Obviously, I would have gone Firpo, but I was trying to keep to Championship teams. Leeds being promoted, obviously. Midfield. I'm trying to remember who I picked, who was in there now.
So your midfield picks are probably my favourite picks, actually, and the most intriguing, because I think they're really good Championship players that could attract that interest from a whole host of clubs. You've got Billy Mitchell at Millwall, who I really like, and Ledson at Preston, who I think Preston fans would be aghast to see him go, because he's really a fan's favourite. So those two are quite interesting, actually. If you can pick them up on a free, I think you're getting two very good players.
I think so, mate. I'd, if Albion were to bring Ledson in, I'd be quite pleased. On a free to add some depth to midfield. I really would, because I've watched him a couple of times. Well, I watched him more than a couple of times over the course of last season. Every time I watched Preston, he was the one that stood out for me in the middle of the park. Offered a bit of attacking threat and attacking flair, but he was able to get stuck in as well. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of Championship teams looking at him. Look, I'm going to be honest with you with Mitchell. He's one I don't know much about. I know you've talked him up a few times, after watching Millwall off the back of this great run. And from what I was reading today is that he's really impressed Neil since Neil came in. He kind of got over his injuries and got back in the team. So I wouldn't be surprised to if Millwall are working really hard to try and get him to sign a new deal, because again, I think he's only 24. I think,
and he's born and bred Millwall as well.
He's a big Millwall fan, exactly. So I'd be really surprised if Millwall, and especially with how Millwall have finished the season as well. They've had a really good finish this season, nearly got into the playoffs. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't sign a new deal with them. But yeah, as of this moment, he is out of contract and free for people to talk to.
And then you've got a three in behind a striker. So you've got Tyrese Dolan, who we spoke about, Ryan Brewster, and Dean Ghana.
Dolan's the pick, I think, mate. Yeah. I think he is. I think in terms of Championship freebies, he is the pick of the bunch, because look, I know he can be a bit frustrating and he can go missing from time to time, and I know Blackburn fans do get frustrated with him sometimes. They say he's got a bit of an ego, but mate, every time I see him play, he is exciting. He's dangerous, takes people on, goal threat. I like him a lot. If Albion, there's a big chance of Tom Fellows maybe leaving in the summer, and we're looking to bolster our options out wide. I think he'd be a great addition. Again, he's only 23, something like that. He's still really young. I think he's the pick of the bunch, to be honest with you. And I wouldn't be surprised if vast majority of Championship teams are making a move for him in the summer. And even if someone like Bristol or Coventry were to win the playoffs and go up, and they're just looking to boost numbers, get some players, I think he'd be maybe a player those kind of teams will be looking at as well, to be honest with you. So
link today to Borough, and you imagine Borough pay money in terms of wages. I imagine they pay good wages.
That's the kind of level of team I think he's going to end up moving to. It's going to be a kind of a Borough, someone like ourselves, maybe someone one of the teams that don't make it out of the playoffs. That kind, I do think that's his level. Blackburn are obviously that level. I don't know what the circumstances are as to whether Blackburn are trying their hardest to try and get him to sign a new deal, or there's been a breakdown, or what. Again, I was struggling to kind of find an article that kind of confirmed it one way or another. But yeah, if he's kind of made his mind up that he's going to move on elsewhere, then yeah, he'll be hot property, I feel, in the summer.
You've gone with a lone striker, Emile Rees. We saw him score at the weekend. Is there any chance he's going to stay in the Championship? Do you think he'll move abroad?
No, well, there's potential for him to move abroad. I don't know. Again, I do think he could be a really good signing for someone in the Championship, whether that be maybe a team higher up the division as competition, as competition and someone to bring in off the bench, or for maybe one of the teams, they're starting number 9 for one of the teams a bit lower down the table, or one of the teams that come up, because again, he's proven he can score goals at this level. Again, I think he's made double figures this season for a Preston team that really struggles to score goals. 26, I believe. So again, a lot of football ahead of him still. Yeah, on a free, I think there'll be a lot of teams interested in him. We're going to touch on Grady and Brewster. Those two are. I'm really interested to see where those two guys end up, because they are arguably the two most frustrating players in the Championship, because there's undoubtedly, there's undoubtedly some talent there. There's talent, there's ability there in both of them. But for whatever reason, they're not capable of delivering that, anywhere near consistently enough. And I feel with both of them as well that there's just a bit of a kind of attitude problem there. There's a bit of an ego. There's a bit of something, a bit of a chip on their shoulder for whatever reason. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting to see where those two guys end up. As to whether someone out there thinks, take a risk on them, or there's a manager who feels, well, they need to be kind of dealt with in a certain way, certain manner to get the very best out of them. I don't know, but in terms of ability, both players have undoubtedly got it, but both of them just don't show it anywhere near enough. Are incredibly frustrating. I'd be surprised. There's not many Albion fans out there, I don't think, who are disappointed to see Grady released, and I think the same can be said for Sheffield United fans with Brewster as well.
Yeah, Brewster's legacy will be the goal in the Steel City derby, I'm sure. Okay, we'll. I was going to ask you who your pick was, but you already answered that in Tyrese Dolan. We'll see if he ends up at the Albion next season. Okay, listen, we'll call it a night there. We'll be kind of doing stuff over the playoffs, so Thursday, Friday, we'll try and get something on the go. And then next Monday, Tuesday as well. So it's going to be busy in terms of these playoffs. But yes, if you have been dipping in and out, I've seen people have, so give us a wee like, leave us a comment, all that good stuff. And we will see you on the other side. Thank you.